Welcome to TruPowur, home of the most powerful marketing tools, training, and technology on planet Earth. Get ready to earn, enjoy, and experience more than you ever dreamed was possible. If you're tired of just getting by and ready to really thrive, then buckle in and listen up. Here's your host, Matt Fox.
Hello and welcome to TruPowur Academy. And last week we went over the 101 outline and overview with WattHub. And that included avoiding cost of energy, production modeling, commercial solar design, EPC vetting, and working with a board. This week, we are going to be looking at 201 of the series and outline and the overview covering pricing examples, construction examples, construction scheduling, and selling proper customer expectations, and of course, commissions and sales confidence. So without any further ado, let's turn it over to John McDonald and Everett Brewer of WattHub.
Thank you all for joining. I appreciate it.
We appreciate everybody's time. We wanted to follow up with the training last week of Commercial Solar Sales 101 with the 201 series. What we're going to learn today is quite a bit about the construction side of it and what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and give you guys a little insight on the type of products and racking and solar deployment products that can happen and what is the most viable for getting a deal done. I think everybody is interested in making sales and commercial and adding these large elephants to their repertoire. So we can just jump in and get started. We're going to go over who we are for the people that have not attended or viewed the Zoom meeting last week. We're going to go over it fast. So Everett will just jump in and just burn through this. So for the people who haven't joined us last week, we can talk a little bit about who we are. I'm at the top, John McDonald, founder and CEO of WattHub back in 2011. Also a founder and partner in Sunrenew Solar, which is a commercial solar EPC. That's where I get all my construction knowledge from. Bring it over to the WattHub side, very valuable. Have a few companies and they're all growing and we're having a lot of fun. So Everett, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everybody jumping on today. My name is Everett Brewer. I'm one of the founders here at WattHub. I come from a construction and industrial background. Used to build fabrication buildings for Intel and Motorola. And through that, I was able to easily liaison over to commercial solar in this regard. I also own Eco Holdings. It's a technology holdings company, which gets into the AI controls aspect when it comes to energy efficiency, building management systems, and energy storage controller systems. And then I'm also the founder and CEO of TruPowur, which we specialize in C&I energy storage solutions globally, into microgrid utility scale, into frequency regulation, and of course into the residential space. We provide hardware for the residential market for those of you that are into residential energy storage component. So come from a long line of energy efficiency aspects and renewable energy. And what's great about it is that all John's experience and my experience combine really well to where we can support a product from A to Z, not only from just a solar standpoint, but also take it from an aspect of most efficient aspect of any kind of project and installation. So who the heck is WattHub in this position is so WattHub, just give you a quick breakdown on who we are and understanding what our ultimate goals are here is we have been in the business for now, if you can go to the next slide, John. We've been in the business for over 13 years. With the experience that we have, we really have the ability to support projects on a holistic level all across the nation. So we have over 3,800 channel partners, which means there's 3,800 companies that use us on a day-to-day basis to fill their gaps in the renewable energy space in commercial. or help support from development, engineering, procurement, construction, design, and underwriting and finance. And so with our experience through these companies, which we have, WattHub, of course, our main company, stores power from energy storage standpoint, Lockbit as a control system. We have over 25 years of experience amongst ourselves. So feel free to lean on us for any kinds of concerns or questions. We've developed over $1 billion in projects in our career, in our 13 years of over 13 years in business, installed over 400 megawatts of project. We have our tech company that we call Clean Connectivity. What our ultimate goal is connect the right people to the right solution. In this case, it's not always a position of what you know. Sometimes it's who you know. In this scenario, and who knows me, right? And Clean Connectivity, the WattHub allows you to come on board, and we can support the projects direct, or you can get connected with the people that actually can support the project with you. So there's over 2,300 EPCs inside that network, over 200 direct-to-manufacturer relationships, 60 banks, 15 tax equity funds, multiple tech providers within. And in that regard, it allows us to take a project from A to Z, as it takes a village to sometimes get these projects to fulfillment. We do finance, we do have expertise in underwriting and finance and the legal agreements and association. And we offer over 21 different underwriting types with multiple different term lengths in between. That's typically the reason that a project goes forward or not. And we'll get into financing in the training in section 301, which is next Wednesday at the same time. So please tune in. And getting into the underwriting aspect of C&I will be a major focus for that training for this next week.
All right, just to give you a quick recap of if you didn't attend or you haven't watched the video recording on YouTube of the 101, what we learned is avoided cost. You need to get it right because it's everything. Avoided cost dictates the pricing that would be supported, and it dictates the commissions, which we'll get into later in this series. Production modeling, don't be that guy. We still see a lot of proposals sent our way for either revisions or review and see how they can make this commercial deal work. And a lot of times people are just overstating production. We went over the condition sets for helioscope, PV watts, PV syst in the last training. You don't want to kill your own deal because 95% of commercial solar projects are financed, and there's somebody on the financing side that will run their own production and call you out if you're overstated. Design with simplicity. We're going to talk a lot about that. So this is a good segue into this 201 training series. Designing with simplicity is everything because you want to keep costs as low as possible to give the customer the best pricing possible so they have the highest savings possible. Start from the top. So you want to start from the top of a commercial organization, whether it be a school, municipality, a university, hospital, or church. You want to start at the top. If there's a general manager, CFO is a great contact, CEO, superintendent, you want them to push you down to get the right data, push you down to the facilities guy. Going upwards is a lot harder. So when you're looking at prospecting, you want to target general managers for commercial. You want to target the owners for investment properties. You want to target the superintendents, and then much more in detail on the recording. So it's about an hour. If you've got an hour to kill, check out a YouTube link that's in this video. Wonderful. So again, thank you for your time. Your time is valuable, so we want to make sure that we cover a lot of ground, and we're going to try to shorten it up this time, even though there's a lot of content to cover. So the number one, we're going to go over pricing examples. So rooftop, carport, ground mount. That leads into constructability examples, construction schedules. What does a schedule look like for a commercial project? This all falls back into the sales process because when you're talking to the owner or your prospect, you need to know what sound like you know what you're talking about. So we're going to go through all the schedules and you can lay it out. And then that's a big key that we found in our 13 years of experience that lets them know that you know exactly what you're doing. Even if you've never built a commercial project before, we're going to talk the talk. Setting proper customer expectations. We're going to talk a lot about commissions, what ranges, what do I make off of a commercial project? Can I do the project? Can I just send you over the lead and get paid. All of those we're going to talk about. And then sales confidence to tie it all together. So I'm going to talk a little bit about pricing examples on rooftop solar. It's the most cost-effective way other than, utility scale ground mount. But if we're targeting commercial and industrial, you're going to come across more rooftop than not. So a little bit about the roof types. Flat roof, if you're in the Southwest or anywhere in the country, really, there's a couple types of flat roof. Elastomeric is a foam. You've got a torch down, which is those sheets that they torch. It's got the crumbled pebbles on top. And then you've got a TPO roof, which is basically a rubber membrane strips that they adhere together all over the roof. It's so one of the brand names of that is Carlisle. And when you're doing those types of projects, you just got to be careful of making sure that underneath your ballast trays or your points of attachment adhere to the warranty of those. Then you've got your pitched roof. Standing seam metal is the number one least expensive way to mount solar. So if you see a standing seam metal roof prospect, know that it's very good. No roof penetrations. There's these things called S5 clamps that basically clamp to the standing seam, to that little metal seam, and then attaches to a rail thereafter. They also make railless, so it's fast and easy installation. So standing seam metal is a preferred way that we like to mount solar. And you got your corrugated metal, which is the wavy metal, and then a lot of you are familiar with the concrete tile, S-tile or flat concrete tile. Either way, you guys install a lot of residential rooftop solar systems, so you're very familiar with this type of application. The Spanish tile, we don't see a heck of a lot of Spanish tile in commercial, but you do occasionally get somebody who has a small either office building or multi-use building and has Spanish tile. I'm 235 pounds. I can't get up on the roof and install that. I will crack every tile that I walk on. So it's a lot of times we just look for other ways to install solar rather than getting on a Spanish tile.
Absolutely. And to add to that too, in the case that Spanish tile is present on that installation, and there's just no other location to look at solar as far as allocating those panels anywhere. Really the only workaround in that regard is something they call a inlay. So it adds to the cost, adds to the labor. You're physically going through there and you're uninstalling a path to the section where you're going to be installing the solar panels. You're physically uninstalling those Spanish tiles, and then you're typically doing an underlay of like an asphalt shingle or a rolled shingle roofing, and then you go through and put the solar panels inside of that inlay and make sure that we come right up inside of there. So those are some of the workarounds, but it adds to the timeline, adds to the labor, and adds to the cost. So we'll obviously be referencing that later on in the training, is that simplicity is bliss in this position. Is even though it's an option doesn't mean it always pencils, especially different underwriting types that are available to that customer, which we'll get into section 301.
You got it. So let's go through some rooftop pricing. This is not a hard and fast rule. This is because we've had probably 1,000 projects get listed through WattHub platform, and we've also installed our hundreds of projects ourselves. Generally speaking, here's where commercial and industrial will fall into the range of pricing. There's going to be some that is priced less. There's going to be some that's priced higher for certain reasons. But generally speaking, 100 to 500 kilowatts, we're looking at $1.65 to $2.10. Now the variance is the rooftop application is, if you're looking at the picture of the rooftop, the left side of the roof, where there's a lot more breaks and some obstructions versus the right side of the roof, that is more of a square. When you're doing a ballast system, you really want to look for ease of installation. So if you have a lot of roof obstructions and you've got sporadic panels here, sporadic panels there, it increases the cost of extra racking components. It increases the cost of your ballast block, which your ballast block is going to run you anywhere between 2 and 4 cents a watt just for the ballast, the block, the weight. And so $1.65 to $2.10 also depends on interconnection type. If you're doing line side taps, which we're going to get into a little bit later. So what you're going to look for in terms of a preference is large unobstructed roofs. We all know that's the card that we're dealt doesn't necessarily have anything to do with our preference. So we just do what we can. And this is a good example of certain sections of ballast block and ballast racking is a lot less per square foot in weight. So you're looking at, maybe 4.5 pounds a square foot if you've got a perfect square, versus sporadic arrays. You're looking at more like 7, 8, 9. I've seen it as high as 10 to 12 pounds a square foot. But then you're getting into structural integrity. So a quick example of structural, we ballasted a system on our office building. So we have an office condo in Scottsdale, Arizona. For whatever reason, we have to engineer it to 115 mile an hour winds. So our ballast weight on, I think it's a 12 kilowatt system that we have up there, just a small guy. But because of roof obstructions, we were up into 10 pounds a square foot. So we actually had to get up in the rafters and brace the rafters, which was a requirement for structural. Those are the types of things that can add to the cost of an entire project and maybe even push it into a realm where it no longer pencils. So looking for ease of simplicity, ease of racking. And there was a good question last time on the 101 training is EPC from Florida said, hey, we can't ballast rack it. We need to engineer to up to 170 mile an hour winds. Great question, great comment. And so you're going to have to penetrate, but you're going to want to use the right points of attachment, the right penetrations. We saw a project that we helped finance was just kind of put on blast on LinkedIn by the city of Bakersfield structural inspector. So he posted a video of shaking a rack. Now, we didn't build this. We just helped bring the financing to secure it. And it was built terribly. So the video was shaking the rack, and it was a tilt-up multi-panel point of attachment style of installation. And it almost shook the panels off. I don't know if you guys have seen that on LinkedIn, but it was pretty bad. So what they have to do is take off all of the panels on the rooftop and the carport and reinstall them, and they owe a re-roof to it too. So the quality of EPC that we discussed in 101 certainly plays a factor, and you don't want to get caught because it's a huge insurance claim. Someone's getting sued, someone's going down, and it's that EPC that the general contractor hired because he was the lowest price EPC. You get into a little bit larger systems. We all want these elephants, 500 kilowatts to 2 megawatts. Believe it or not, it's actually the easiest to finance. 500 kilowatts and above, investment grade credit. There's tons of money out there that's competitive for. EPCs are $1.60, $1.80 a watt is what we see. The bigger the system, the less the cost. You got to keep in mind you could get into medium voltage with the larger systems, which requires a different license than even Sunrenew, my EPC, has. So you've got a high voltage license, but then there's a medium voltage license. And so a project that we're doing down in Tucson, Arizona, has about 1,000-foot run. And so we needed to upsize the conductors. We needed to, or the wires going underground to connect to the main service panel, and it gets into medium voltage. So we needed to hire a third party that was a union shop actually to help that. The wire alone on a 1 megawatt system with long runs, with 1,000-foot runs, was $110,000. Nuts. Big wire, big conduits, big underground. So that's the type of thing that gets pricey in all large commercial systems.
Absolutely. And just a quick preference here is these are price estimates that we're referencing here at a wholesale. So a turnkey hard cost EPC, engineering, procurement, construction, just as a preface in this position. Of course, margin is beyond that. Yep.
And so, this encompasses a fee, but there's nothing that says, hey, give me a baseline or a red line that most guys are used to. and you want to mark that up. You just got to be careful with that because you could mark it up outside of financeability, which we'll talk about. So everybody wants carports. Carports are the most desired type of solar installation from a customer standpoint. They are also the most expensive. They have a dual purpose, give the shade, plus the energy. A lot of schools, it depends on the state that you're in. So you want to check this out. Some school associations board, the governing board over all public and private schools, some of those in some states say you can't rooftop mount solar system on the school because it's how they're paid per head of students. And if you install anything over the roofs, then that could eliminate the budget of re-roofing down the line because you tampered with it. So in Arizona, they're saying that it's frowned upon to install solar on roofs, even though we've done it. You'd want to get a waiver. So that's what makes carports so valuable. Is you get the shade, it's out of the way. You don't have to take the panels off to re-roof. It's basically built and lasts forever. A couple of different carport types. The least expensive kind of carport is the T canopy. So in the picture, the top left, it's dual cantilever. So you've got equal distance on both sides. That really reduces the column and the beam gauge of steel. Once you get into the semi-cantilever and full cantilever, you got to increase the member and the beam size. It's just a little bit more, needs more beefing on structural integrity. So the top right picture is semi-cantilever. You see on the right side, it's got a little bit of cantilever versus a lot on the left side. Though the beam can go anywhere on that, it's just each custom carport is custom engineered for the application on the site. If they're cookie cutter designs, yes, but that's where you really want to be. 8-degree max slope for the semi cantilever, and then a 12-degree max slope on the dual cantilever. These are just examples. You can do up to 12 is typically what we've seen before you have to increase the column and beam size significantly because it acts as a sail for uplift. So the bottom left picture is a full cantilever. It's just got a beam. It looks like a reverse L. So that requires a lot of beefy structural steel, where if you could just add a little bit of cantilever and put that beam a little bit closer into the nose of the parking spot, you're going to be better off. It's a lot less expensive. We've done superstructures. We've done custom structures. The bottom right picture that you're looking at was something we did at a church, and it was over a grassy area. So we're going to talk about superstructures in a second, but this was something that we just came up with and built, and it didn't violate intellectual property from one company that holds a patent for superstructures. So it's a nice way to give a customer shade, and it's not wildly more expensive than a regular carport.
Quick comment on that as well is, each one of these design elements can be available, but one of the things that are typically unknown at the design and proposal stage, and why we always recommend, is keeping it simple in the initial design. Under promise, over perform in this position is that you have to account for the pile depths. What is the soil type? Is there bedrock underneath? What is the integrity of that soil? What is the wash point of that soil in any kind of geotech aspects of it? You have to account for any kind of snow loads that may be accounted for in those regions. In the case that you can't go to a certain pile depth, which is recommended, depending on the type of cantilever or any kind of weight or structural requirements of the goal of the structure, there's options where you have to get into spread footings. That's where you're physically putting in a wide concrete pad on the bottom and different depths, and incorporating a specific amount of rebar and steel inside of there, which increases cost, labor, and material. You also have to account for wind loads in your areas. So for example, a wind load in a market like Utah or Arkansas is going to be much different if it's coastal in Florida, or Corpus Christi, Texas, or in the Bay of California. So these are things that we like to keep in recommendation here. For the fact is that keep it simple initially, and don't be afraid to ask for those additional questions. In the addition to even the structural plans for a rooftop flat array, if you start having a broke up array there, don't be afraid to ask for structural information on that building before you start making any kind of promises, or wait till you can get to a conducted audit to identify that. We see a lot of plans that are submitted to us for review, and without that information, and unfortunately some of those don't meet those check boxes, and so we end up having to reduce those system sizes. And nothing's worse from a customer experience standpoint than starting big and having to go down. It's always nice to say, hey, this is what we're recommending at this point, and once we get the structural information, so we can identify if we can use these other areas within your property or rooftop. So just keep that in mind, and keep your environment in reference to your design use. And if in the case that you guys need that additional support, don't be afraid to call on WattHub in that regard, and we can help put our experience and touches in these different regions. We've worked all across the country, and we can look at those different options up front from our experiences and make sure that we have more probability of that project moving forward.
You got it. Great point on spread footers. We encounter that at various times. It's not often. But a project we recently quoted for finance, the EPC came back and said, hey, we looked at the geotech report, which is a soils report, and our column length would have to be 35 feet underground if we did a pier footing, which is what you see on the screen, is just a beam going straight down encased by a 2-foot hole of concrete, where the less depth you can get to, let's say there's bedrock down there or something like that you run into, the wider the hole needs to be. And at some point, it just makes more sense to do a spread footer, which is 2 to 3 feet underground, but a wide base. And so it could be 8 by 10 feet wide with rebar, like Everett mentioned. And so the cost adder of that is about $2,500 on the West Coast. It's probably more like $3,500 on the East Coast. And so if you have 50 columns and they all require spread footers, you're looking at $125,000 to $200,000 adder to do the carport system. So that's where it's important to request the geotech. Do you have a geotech? They cost about $1,500 to do, and you're going to want to do that before you get on site. So as we're bidding, or if you're an EPC, or we can help you read a geotech if you have a customer that says, hey, here's a geotech, can we do carports? If they built the building and have the plans, they might have a geotech, so always ask for that. So we're going to talk about carport pricing now. You've got the small guys, the 50 kilowatts to 200 kilowatts. It's economies of scale. It is what it is, guys. We usually bid out 3 to 6 different vendors, depending on which state we're working in. There's some companies that are good. There's some companies that are really bad, that they love to change order. So they'll give you the bottom of the barrel, low cost price, and they come back and say, oh, this is going to be more. This is going to be more. Oh, you want clips and clamps? Oh, that's going to be more. So you got to be careful on who you're dealing with. But raw cost of a total project is between $2 and $2.75 for all carports. If you have a blend of rooftop and carports, naturally you're going to get the blend of both pricing ranges. The carport raw cost, this is just a cost from the fabricator and installer itself, 60 to 80 cents for the small system sizes. So adding that to the rest of the pricing and labor and modules and inverters and design, engineering, permitting, overhead, markup, all that stuff, that's where you get to the $275 range. 200 to 500 kilowatts, you start seeing it coming down. You get some economies at scale. The more columns you put in, the less it costs to put a column in. Raw cost is between 55 and 70 cents. And then you get your 501 to 2 megawatt projects between $1.70 and $2.20 a watt for all carports. This is where avoided cost is everything, because if you have an avoided cost customer with 10 cents or above, awesome. Now we're in the ballpark for anything above 200 kilowatts. If they have less than 10 cents, it's going to be tough to do all carports.
Yeah, and any of you that are not familiar with the term avoided costs, please reference our training 101 that's on our YouTube channel, and that will help you understand what that term means in the industry. It'll dictate the ability to execute on a higher cost installation type, where if a client is requesting for carports, that you can make sure that that's an option that will pencil. Too many times we have clients that want to go that route to strictly canopies, say, hey, no rooftop at all, or, I want this certain kind of underwriting type that I heard through the market. And when the cost of the installation goes up, it doesn't always mean it's going to pencil from an underwriting standpoint. So keep that in mind and keeping cautious there. And if, again, you need that support, feel free to reach out and we'll help on that development standpoint.
One of the questions you might get from a customer, again, is going back to, act as if, is, hey, where do you put the inverters? Do you put them on the columns of the carports, or do you put them on the building? Now, different designers are going to argue one way or the other. There's no right and wrong here. We usually install the inverters on the columns because you can install them 10 feet high so no one can touch them. And once you convert the DC energy to AC energy, your voltage drop is less on the AC side. So you have to upsize your wires a little bit less. I mean, it's marginal. But you're going to connect each carport on an underground jumper. And then from there, we usually install a combiner panel, an AC combiner panel on the carport column, and then run one wire back to the main service panel and the disconnects and all the meter bases and so forth. There's no right or wrong answer. You can do it any way. It's the application of the building, application of the installation that will usually dictate this. But if it's on a normal basis, inverters on columns, they're in the shade, they're out of reach, they're easily access to maintain them. So it depends on whatever your designer is doing, and we can help, jump in and show you how to put this thing together, what the most cost-effective way. Entrenching underground is one big unforeseen condition. And so we're going to get into contracts next week when we get into financing. The contracts are so critical to a commercial project that bail your ass out every single time, because we have clauses in there that, we're not responsible for unforeseen conditions. We can get an 811 and a blue stake, whatever it's called in your state. We can get a private locator. Not all of the underground stuff, especially on old sites. We did a public school that they had underground that wasn't marked. They did not have a tracer wire in the conduit, and it did not show up. So we clipped a water line, big water main, clipped it, flooding of the site. I mean, these are things that happen on construction projects, and these are things that are okay to tell a customer is, we may encounter some unforeseen conditions underground, but guess what? We're going to be here and we're going to take care of it. We're going to repair it. So getting as much information on the site that you can is critically important. And so trenching underground depends on your run. It depends on the length. You can do trenchings where you just rent a trencher and dig a 24-inch trench about 18 inches wide or so. It's typical. Or you could do underground boring. And if you're going to go through a lot of parking lot because you're building carports, boring is more expensive, but you may want to put that in the budget because you're not having to patch back and fill trenches. And that gets costly, and then you could see them forever because you could tell it's a patch. So trenching could run anywhere between 5 cents a watt and 15 cents a watt, depending on how much trenching or underground boring you have to do. So to answer that question. So pricing examples, we specialize in commercial and industrial, and so we've done ground mounts, and I'll be the first one to tell you I don't have a tremendous amount of experience in ground mount, but we built them. So the ease of access is nice, that you can come and wash the panels because they're on the ground. They do have a little bit higher of cost when you get into tracking for operations and maintenance. So your fixed tilt is the most cost effective. There's no moving parts. You can typically get 20 to 35 degrees wherever you are in the country to maximize the production. You can jump into a single axis tracker increases production about 20% or so. And again, that's a loose figure depending on where you are in the country. And then your dual axis tracking, we don't really see this often. This could be, some people install dual axis tracking for residential. Increases production 25 to 30% over fixed tilt, but you need a lot of land and spacing. So that's where, if you're land abundant, you may want to look at it to maximize the yield. It all depends on the cost of the tracking and what the operations and maintenance budget is for that too. So we like fixed tilt. It's just up there, it works, and there's no moving parts, easy to get to. Trackers will add about a half a penny on operations and maintenance, which over time does affect the PPA rate. So you get increase in production boost, but then you also got to increase the cost to maintain it. So overall, on a tracker basis, there is a benefit to that, but it is not, we haven't installed one. Rapid shutdown. NEC 17 does not require rapid shutdown for canopies and carports. And I haven't read what NEC 2020 is, and that won't be instituted for a year or two, but NEC 17 rapid shutdown is required for rooftop, but not for carports. And again, don't run and tell an inspector, well, John said it's not required. Certain jurisdictions may require it, which might just be an interpretation of the code. But I know the permits that we've pulled, the projects we've installed, it is not required. So that's a great question. So superstructures, these are big and beautiful structures. What you're looking at is a picture of Dream City Church in Phoenix, and a tornado did not come through and blow off panels. It was designed that way by an architect. So it's called the Doppeled light effect. So some panels are left off, so you get this random light underneath, and they end up finishing that campus, and they have a big congregation brunch area underneath that. So superstructures, we built a handful of them. We built building integrated stuff, usually about 20 feet high, plus this one that you're looking at is about 30 feet high. Cover full parking lots. This is a good way if you need more energy and you've got two single space rows coupled in between a drive aisle, you can cover that whole thing with solar canopy. That goes back to some of the custom superstructures that we built. It's expensive. It's a custom fabrication. This particular one is called a Power Parasol. They built it ASU, Arizona State University, Fry's. They have these in California and Arizona, and it's a patented structure. So if you're going to get a superstructure and you're creatively designing it, just be careful above 17 feet, 60 by 60 or greater, and tilted up panels with some panels missing. That is the interpretation of the intellectual property that this patent has. So you don't want a patent troll to come and say, hey, you built that structure, now you owe me a royalty because that is my design. So we've encountered that. We've gotten around that. That's where be careful of the intellectual property. Some people ask, what is the adder for parking garage steel? So if you have a multi-deck parking garage, it's kind of like a superstructure. Your adder is going to be about raw cost $1.20 a watt. So that's what you would pay somebody to build 300, 500 a megawatt of solar above a big parking garage. Superstructure like this, you're anywhere between $1 and $1.50 a watt. This is just for the structure itself. Now, total cost, parking garage solar, probably in the threes, low threes maybe. A superstructure only, you're probably $325 to $350 if you're doing this type of structure that's in the picture. Jumping through constructability examples. We're going through a lot of design, we're going through a lot of jargon, so don't fall asleep because your customer is going to ask you this stuff. The customer may ask, hey, how are we going to interconnect? Your customer is going to want carports. Your customer is going to want superstructures. It just boils down to, is it financeable? Is it going to save the customer enough money that the payment, because it's commercial is 95% finance, but one way or another, that the savings delta is enough for them to move forward. So your breaker interconnection is jumping into a breaker spot, the least expensive way of interconnection preferred. Line side tap. So this is always difficult because it's something that you're going to hear if you're in commercial, and you're going to need to know the interconnection types. In the 101 training, we talked about the minimum pictures to get. Now you can't see the bus bar with those pictures, which you'll need a trained electrician to go out and look for, pull off the dead front and look at the bus. But a line side tap is essentially a clamp on the bus that you drill a hole and put this clamp in that taps the bus. The problem with that is you void the UL certification on the main service panel. Now, you've got to get it recertified, so that can be done. Those recertifications run anywhere between $3,500 and $5,000. So you can see the cost magnitude of a 50 kilowatt project versus doing a 500 kilowatt project that you need a line side tap on. It's the same cost to recertify. So TUV Ryland flies some guy who's trained out there to look and see what you did. He's there for 5 minutes. He slaps a sticker on it, and then he leaves and flies home. And that's what the cost is. It's pretty crazy. Your long trench and home runs, getting back to customers wanting carports. You want to stick to simplicity, and that's one of the biggest things that is a takeaway of this 201 is simplicity is bliss. Your sporadic canopies that are all over the site, the facility is going to add in long trench home runs. It's going to add an upsized wire cost. Like I said, for a megawatt project, I've never seen a cost this high of $110,000 for wire, but that's what it costs because we got it to medium voltage. And then the question of transformers, do we add them? Rule of thumb, if you want to jot this down, is 300 kilowatts. Between 200 and 300 makes sense to add a transformer and go with 480 inverters because you get the cost benefit to the inverters on the buy, but you got to add and install a transformer. And that cost is usually, for 500 kilowatts and up, it's probably a penny a watt. For 200 kilowatts to 500 kilowatts, you're probably looking at 2 cents a watt. For 100 to 200 kilowatts, you're got a significant jump. You're looking at 4 or 5 cents per watt adder of just the transformer cost, not including labor. And then under 100 kilowatts, just go with the 208 inverters because it's 10 or 15 cents per watt. Something that a lot of people don't know too, fun fact, is transformers always use energy even when they're not working. So this is something that there's a small load attached to the building when you install a transformer. It's always waiting, it's always ready, and it's always using energy. And it may be nominal, but over the course of the year, 2 to 3% is substantial that you just added to a load of a building.
Absolutely. And when you're doing any kind of long trenching runs, you need to account for step up and step down transformers. And that's typically when your voltage loss or your ends up being too significant. And making some of those decisions obviously comes down to the constructability of that project. Overall financial and cost goals to hit the underwriting type, which we'll reference again this next week. So ultimately, all this Solar 101 and Solar 202 that we're reviewing here ultimately gets our project to financeability. And that's what our ultimate goal is. As you can see, 95% of the projects need some type of financing vehicle in some way, shape, or form. And so just definitely look at the efficiency and the overall cost structure. Being a yes man in the commercial business can really get you in some hot water.
You got it. Most financing companies will limit the voltage loss combined total from jumpers to home runs to everything to 3%. So 2.5 to 3% is a baseline. So the designer needs to upsize all of your wires to be under that, and then that's where the cost comes in. So if you're doing a run of 1,000 feet or more, maybe 3,000 feet, for example, get a ground mount interconnection is 1,700 feet away, 2,000 feet away, half a mile. You step up the voltage to it could be 12,000 volts, and then it steps down to the 480 or 208, whatever you're connecting to the substation or main service panel. So in those cases, when you have substantially long runs, you have to have 2 transformers. But those are usually on bigger projects, megawatts and up. Everett, do you want to run through the commercial project schedule and duration?
Yeah,
for
absolutely.
everybody, this is really what you're going to talk the talk. They're going to say, well, how long does this project take? And that's what you're going to learn from Everett.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we want to cover here is that before I get into the first stage, which is execution on the project and timeline of that, we really want to focus on the fact of what it takes to get to that stage. And so what we've typically seen in the commercial industry is we average 36 touches per client to get to a letter of intent, which then starts executing these timelines in association with fulfilling the project. What those 36 touches come into is you've really got to get into the courting portion of your business. You've got to get into the fact is you got boards or multiple boards. As we reference in Term 101, there was a project that we had processed is they had a general board, they had an executive board, they had a financial board, and then they also had their CPA and accounting firm in addition. So through 4 boards and doing about 11 meetings with those individual boards along that way, we finally got to ourselves to a letter of intent standpoint. And the reason that we start with a letter of intent and our recommendations, and this is how we do our business, not saying that this is why this is the only way to do it. The reason we do it in our position is that this is us agreeing to an initial design and proposal or any kind of proposed underwriting type. And then getting to a letter of intent allows us to say, hey, we're now in an exclusive relationship. Now let's move forward to getting to financial review and then getting the site inspections completed. And that way we can come back and make any pivots or adjustments from a design standpoint, a structural standpoint, and even from their financial health of their business. And so typically what we're seeing is from a courting standpoint, if things are running smoothly, you can get through those 36 touches on average within a couple months. We've seen much longer than that. We've seen years in this commercial industry, but that's typically what we're looking for through that process. So identifying this countdown, once we have a project that is confirmed that it's financeable, obviously the design aspect is finally confirmed, then we'll go through and execute that agreement type. And that agreement type could vary amongst 21 different underwriting types, or if it's cash. It's very rare there's cash in our business, unfortunately. It would make it a lot easier. But once we have that in place, we're ready to move forward. What we're looking at doing is that we first get into the design and engineering. Once design and engineering is complete, we typically like to send this to the customer. We typically send over an 80% plan set for review, making sure that the client is confirmed that the location of the panels, the layout, any kind of questions that may be coming through. It also is going to identify final equipment and make sure that everything's very smooth, that the customer has their stamp of approval in that position. That typically is going to execute from a financier or from somebody who is paying us or the contractor, typically about a 10% draw at that standpoint. The second stage is getting over to permitting. We're going to go ahead and submit over to permit. And then once we start getting close to getting a permit in hand, we'll start working on getting procurement. That procurement, in some cases, if you're ordering transformers, always make sure you're ordering equipment early. Some of your major components do take a longer timeline for delivery. Do not forget that. Many a time we've had clients that usually just want to take a standard approach of like, yeah, we'll just, we know the local warehouse down the street has material in-house, and they take that for granted that the additional, more technical equipment components are readily available as well, and that is false. We've had many a time where we're coming back to a project 2 or 3 months down the road, or a contractor is, because they didn't account for that timeline. Once you're ready to go ahead.
That stuff to piggyback on that. These AC combiner panels or disconnects on commercial projects aren't off the shelf, and so that is what Everett's talking about. You can't just go to your CED, your Wesco, your IES, and say, "Oh, I need a 600, 800 amp AC combiner panel." They don't have them. They have to put an order in to Eaton, Siemens, Sun Valley, whoever the manufacturer is, and they don't get off the couch until it's ordered and paid. So some of the equipment, some of the transformers we've seen Eaton just quoted us on a transformer for that Tucson project, 7 months. So we had to switch brands because we can get it in 3 months. And so it cost us $12,000 to do so. So constructability and procurement, it's a real thing. You're not just buying modules, inverters, and a kit. It's putting all these parts and pieces together, and you may have 6 to 8 different vendors that you order from, and you have to coordinate all that on site.
That's correct. Yeah, and one we look at is we talk about mobilization construction. That's typically where a 50% draw is typically available on a standardized financing agreement. And that mobilization also has a line item typically inside of our agreements, at least, and how we structure it is equipment landed and ready to mobilize. So we want to make sure that the execution of the install company, meaning efficiency is key, that we don't want to elongate that out and have to mobilize multiple times due to delayed procurement. We move forward into the construction completion. Now, construction completions can take a number of different windows, of course, based off the technicality of the job, and also, of course, into any kind of weather aspects that come into play. If you're in the winter months up in the Northeast, of course, you're going to have a few different delays due to just inclement weather, or if you're getting into more of a rainy season, and those kind of aspects come into play. You know, as we all know, electricity and water do not blend well. So we want to take into account for that construction timeline. And then when you get into completions, we really want to make sure that those inspections are key. When we get to completion, that's typically where we're getting into an additional 30% draw in most underwriting types. And then when we get into commissioning or PTO, the other 10% comes into play. Now, one thing that is going to be key and as a recommendation through this construction timeline can take anywhere from 90 days all the way out to 12 to 14 months. It depends on the scale of project, again, technicality and weather patterns included. But one thing that is key is you yourself or an identified development partner needs to make sure that they are on top of any kind of daily logs. As referenced in John's example earlier, where the inspector put that project a little bit on blast down in California, is that nobody was doing daily logged and daily construction milestones and daily imagery to confirm the project and that completion. Could have that been eliminated up front? Absolutely. So a standard process that we require is that we want daily logs and daily photos of the constructability of that project as it's being fulfilled. So that way we can address anything in the timeline. Don't be afraid to have the hard conversations. And the fact is that, hey, we went to go open up XYZ piece of equipment. It was the wrong piece. And then the contractor contacted their suppliers. Their suppliers were delayed 3 to 4 months. Don't be afraid to work with that with the developer. It's not what you know, it's who you know. So that way we can support overall the goal of fulfilling that piece of equipment or any kind of gaps that are in that process. So we've had many a time to where projects have had delays, and it's because there wasn't proper communication of the contractor. And really there was 3 or 4 options to find that solution instead of just the one that he put in place that ended up delaying the project multiple times. So just keep that in mind, is making sure assigning a project manager or someone to oversee those daily processes. Another big barrier of entry, we talked about this on identifying your contractor in Solar 101 as we reviewed, is that these milestones, as you can see, most third-party finance term bankings are going to pay you anywhere from 4 milestones if you're a contractor, or it can be up to 6 milestones in some cases. It really depends on how their structure is set up. And a really easy barrier of entry identifier, if the contractor is going to be able to meet your guidelines, is if they start asking for revenue up front. The commercial industry is on a very strict milestone payment and progress payment schedules. Nothing really varies from that time at any point. Any projects that we've been involved with over the 13, 14 years we've been in business have not changed from that structure. So if they cannot carry those terms, whether they don't have terms with their current suppliers at 30 to 60 day terms, if they don't have any credit lines in place, if they don't have in-house capital to carry that position, that is a very quick identifier that they may not be the right partner. We've had those questions. We've had those conversations with those partners. Some of them are able to do it. Some of them are not. And that's obviously dictates at the end of the day of who we're moving forward with. It's not always going with the lowest price contractor that can't carry their responsibilities of fulfilling that agreement. Another reason that structure is in place is simply this. The financier, why I reference that is because 95% of the projects have a financier in association with it, whether it's tax equity, sponsor equity, debt, so on and so forth. But it protects the financier that ultimately protects the client. In the case that they cannot get equipment packages landed, but they can't mobilize, in that position, they did not lose that revenue on paying a contractor that can't fulfill on that milestone. And so if another contractor needs to come and fulfill that gap, in that position, you now have the revenue to then support that scope of work. So it protects you as a sales organization, as a developer, also as a financier, and also as a construction company, and keeps everybody accountable on that timeline. So typical design from timeline, like I said, it can be anywhere from 90 days to 14 months is what we've typically seen. It really depends on how well the AHJ wants to play, how quick they are to the market. And again, with right now with COVID in place, we are seeing additional delays. So just set those expectations with your clients.
You got it. So I know that we're going to move through these last slides fairly quickly, setting proper expectations. One, you got to know your costs, know what they're asking for, and know if their avoided costs will meet that in general guidelines. Use phrases like, I believe we can, we may be able to, when you're speaking with a customer. As Everett mentioned earlier, you don't want to be a yes man and just say, yep, we can do that. Yep. You could really put yourself in a pickle. So always say, we may be able to, we're going to work hard to do this. And that's going to make them feel like they won. It takes a village, and there needs to be a champion. There's got to be somebody inside the organization that really, really wants it. You want to let them know that this is hard. This is a mini power plant that we're putting on your property, and it has to be done right and built correctly of the highest quality. So it takes a team. And then working with GCs on new builds, you want to make them feel like they're not going to need to babysit you. Typical GCs babysit 12 to 15 different contractor types throughout the build of an actual building. If solar is on that building, you want them to love you as a contractor. And so set the proper expectations and timing, as well as do all the things in advance that they need, interconnection applications, just get everything ready for them and be a good partner. Now, what we're all going to get into is what everybody wants to know is, what can I get paid and how can I make it rain in commercial solar? So Everett, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this situation, what it really comes down to is that unless you're on the construction side, let's just assume that you're not. Typically what we're looking at is a good commercial healthy company in the United States typically runs on about a 35 to 45 cents gross margin, cents per watt. As gross profit. That's post hard EPC. And why we say that is that projects that are usually priced above that typically have a barrier of entry issue on hitting the financing, meaning is that the loan payment or the PPA payment is lower than their electric bill savings. So it's not that you and I don't want to make extra profit in these areas. As we talk of residential, we see in these $1 and $2 a watt gross margins. It's just simply because the financing vehicle doesn't end up being supported. And please join us next week, and that we'll show you how that translates over. But in that position, what we typically run into, if you want to go to the next slide, John,
yep,
is we really want to focus on the fact is that client and what kind of operating, what kind of structures are available to them, right? Are they a for-profit business? Are they a non-profit business? What is their avoided cost? When the avoided cost is down to that 10 cents a watt or lower, or 10 cents a kilowatt hour or lower, just know that we're going to take a haircut, okay? The margins are going to be on the lower side of that project. When we're anywhere from 15 cents and above, there may be the ability to charge more. And again, that's where it based off of what kind of construction solutions you want to offer. Of course, the higher cost of construction means the highest means that could actually challenge your commission structures as well. So in this situation, when we're going into a straightforward project, typically customer acquisition is anywhere from 5 cents to 20 cents a watt that goes in for your cash, some PPAs, and some PACE financing in that position. So that's where, in that position, that's where you could actually bring the project over to us. So we have multiple different options available within WattHub. In the case you guys wanted to leverage us for our expertise, there's an option to where you can go direct into our, what we call our reverse auction bid rooms, where you can request for financing, request for turnkey EPC. That's where, if you're already in the developer seat, you can actually execute an entire project from a paperwork standpoint, design proposal, and any kind of legal agreements. You'd be a great candidate for that. In that position, you're going to look at anywhere from 35 to 45 cents a watt gross. Now, that 35, 45 cents a watt gross, typically what happens is the net on that ends up being around 30 to 40% net, because you still have to put in your proper project management. You're going to have some underwriting and legal fees for any kind of financing vehicles. You're going to also account for any kind of, your inside G&A of supporting that organization, as we all know, keeping butts in seats, software subscriptions, overhead, internet facility, etc. So at the end of the day, the net ends up being the same. Now, WattHub offers a position to where we can be the back end solution, where you're still going to make that 5 to 20 cents a watt net profit, but we are that additional arm to support the development, the underwriting, all the legal agreements, and project management. So either way, that's a line item going to somebody. In this position, it can be us or that can be you. So don't be afraid to call us in that position. When you get into more complicated projects, as we referenced, you start getting into very unique carports and structures. You start getting into third-party financing, where the length of term is much shorter than a traditional residential financing. You get into 20 and 25 years. Again, the haircuts start coming into play. As you can see, the complicated projects, the potential net margin to someone on the customer acquisition side is going to be 3 cents to 15 cents. It starts shortening down a little bit. But then when we get into the WattHub development solution, what we do is we actually make it to where we'll take care of all the roles and responsibilities, and you guys can either stay customer facing, or you can actually have that come over to where we are customer facing, and that's where we'll actually send out 15 to 20% gross of the gross profit directly to you. The reason we use percentages, again, is simply for the fact is that project may be able to go a little fat, or it might be required to go on a little bit more of a haircut. And so that way, that percentage works really well instead of a red line. Red lines do not involve in commercial. If you start getting red line comments from any other partners that are out there, they're coming from a residential background. Keep that in mind. No system is alike in the commercial industry. So when you start getting into the larger commercial systems, that's where you're starting to talk about, 2 megawatts and larger. That's where obviously you have the economies of scale, but the pricing is getting more aggressive at that level. And that's where your average commissions are going to come in for anywhere from 5 to 10 cents a watt, where if you're actually getting into your smaller systems, your 8 to 12 cents is what your 15 to 20% of gross profit equals if you're using WattHub as a partner.
One thing I want to point out, and this is wildly important. I know we're running over a little bit, but there's a scenario where one of our channel partners said, I contracted with this other guy, this EPC. He said he's going to give me $200,000 in this medium-sized deal. I'm like, that is a lot of money. So it was probably in the range of 30 or 40 cents a watt, which that's great. Like, everybody wants to make money. You can make good money from commercial solar systems. However, we said something's going on, something's fishy. It's, it was a 175 kilowatt deal maybe, and he offered $200,000 this channel partner to give him the deal. Turns out the proposal of the customer, the avoided cost was 27 cents. When we ran the avoided cost, it was 11 cents. His price was nearly $4 a watt. So there's some bad apples out there, and there's a lot of people that are going to offer you, they're going to dangle that carrot. Hey, I can pay you this, I can pay you that. I know it happens in residential. In some scenarios, they say, oh, you can make $800 a kilowatt selling with us. Money's great. We're all in this to make money and feed our families. But at the end of the day, commercial systems typically can't support for 30, 40, 50, 70, $1 a watt, because you'll just blow it out. And if someone is offering that, you got to think, is his numbers accurate? Because if we're at $4 a watt and they're really have an 11-cent cost, they're not going to pay for a system that is ROI is 25 to 30 years. It just doesn't make sense. So that's just something that we've experienced and wanted to make sure that there's going to be some people, some commercial contractors that offer you large fat commissions, but check their track record, do your due diligence on them.
Absolutely. And any client that is at a nonprofit, for example, they're going to typically want to look at options like PPAs and SSAs, okay, to understand how the cost of the project in association with the size of the project and how many kilowatt hours it produces is going to dictate that PPA rate. And what you'll simply find is when you get into that $3 a watt, if you select that, and you're in a California market where, let's say it's a 200 kilowatt system and your kilowatt hours peak per kilowatt is 1550. What you'll see is if a client has an 11-cent avoided cost, you'll see the PPA is higher than the avoided cost. So to identify the best pricing there, you actually have to go through there and start dropping the cost of the project, which now you can see that term where I said taking a haircut on a project really applies. So just use that as a tool, as an awareness piece that what we're telling you has truth in how these projects pencil in that position. So overall, we want to make sure you guys have the sales confidence in this position. A world of information for it. We have those experience. We see over 150 projects a month just in the C&I space here at WattHub. And we've seen just about every different size possible. We'll let you know, hey, this has legs, or hey, this actually probably doesn't. And you may not want to venture into that. So at the end of the day, what it comes down to is that is your project that you're trying to tackle, is it financeable? Because we have a 95% chance that that's what it's going to need, some kind of financing vehicle. And high level, we can do that information just in basic conversations. So make sure that you are setting proper expectations, being conservative in your designs, being conservative in all of your structural requirements, making sure that you are accounting for avoided costs, which is in our training 101. And in that position, you'll be set up with a really good armor to get into that job and make sure that project has a potential of moving forward.
And we've been called the solar police before for commercial, and it's not the most glorious title, but we can look at a proposal and tear it apart in about 5 minutes. And because we have so much experience, we know what is real, we know production, we know if they're embellishing, or we'll confirm that, hey, this is a good proposal, go with it, or we'll help you make sure that your proposal to the customer is accurate. And that's nothing kills a deal more when you have to change something at the time of signing. Well, the production really isn't this, so that changes the whole proposal. You guys understand what it's like to use assumptions, and there's a lot more. So like Everett said, use us as a resource, and we'll be happy to go through and make sure you're on the straight and narrow to give you the best chance at winning that project. So you want to right size the system, know what is best to pitch. If you don't, we'll help you. Know your avoided costs. It's 101. Steer the customer sometimes away from carport superstructures, their grand vision for solar, knowing that they have an 8 or 9 cent avoided cost. Design creativity can get you in trouble. This goes back to constructability, long home runs, upsized wire costs. When I first started in this business 13 years ago, I was putting stuff everywhere. I would just, put it here, put it here, put it here. Put 2 panels here because it can fit. Put 7 panels here because it can fit. That's the wrong thing to do, and design with simplicity. Look for energy efficiency upgrades to add to the PV project. That helps significantly. So if you're designing a system and you're on site, look at LED lights, look at HVACs, look at the low hanging fruit that can help reduce the project and throw that in. Rule of thumb is you don't want to add more than 25% of the solar PV cost in energy efficiency. You want to stay under that because that flies under the radar of financing companies. And if you're under the radar of financing companies, they're taking the ITC on the whole thing because you just are including that for the customer and they don't have to revise your pricing. Bigger solar systems aren't necessarily better. This is generally true. If you're prospecting commercial and industrial, you don't want to go with the million square feet of industrial warehouse space because if they have 1 meter, they're in a large rate category. They probably buy raw cost of energy, avoided cost, at 4 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour. That is unfinanceable. You can't do that. So I haven't seen a PPA other than utility scale, massive 100 megawatts, lower than 7 cents. So if you're prospecting, stick with the mush markets. The smaller solar systems are still good. They yield the highest energy, which gets the highest EPC price, which gets the highest commission. And so there's a threshold. You don't really want to go below 100 kilowatts. That's the tough space. Have we got them done? Yes, but it requires an individual investor to own and operate it, and it's just elongates the time of financing. Wrapping this up, our next series is 301. It's next Wednesday. Probably a lot for about an hour and a half on this one because we're going to dive into the different types of financing, commercial solar, everything from PACE to PPAs to prepaid PPAs to leases, different types of leases, and then just your back-end high-level tax equity structures. Which financing is available for which projects? We're going to connect those dots for you next week. Credit underwriting, hugely critical. We get projects thrown at us all the time that says, hey, I've got this customer and they have investment grade credit. They have great credit, but that person never actually saw a balance sheet or financial statement, so they don't really know that. So we'll teach you how to and what to ask for and to show that they have investment grade or not. And then last but not least is contracts. Your contracts need to include a couple of clauses that will save your ass when things pop up, like unforeseen subterranean conditions, acts of God, COVID, different things that it's meaningless jargon in a contract, but it comes to light at times that you don't necessarily expect. So all that we're going to be going through next Wednesday. We appreciate you guys' time. You guys are awesome for hanging in there with us, even though we ran over. We want to do this to help you make money. That's the whole goal, and do it right, because there's a lot of people in this industry in commercial that don't know how to do it, and they screw it up for everybody, and they give us all a black eye. So if you've ever lost a customer because somebody overpromised and underdelivered, that's what we're trying to hedge against.
We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, John and Everett, for all of the valuable information. We look forward to the outline and overview of 301 next week. As always, I hope you found value in today's call. And you don't have to go home, but you can stay here. So have fun storming the castle. Bye now.